So we are back at it. I have JD Piquel with me from College Football with JD. If y'all don't follow his channel, go do so right now. I'll link it in the description. I'll link his Twitter in the description. JD, how are you today?
And I am phenomenal. How are you doing?
Man, I can't complain. Recruiting's in full effect right now for the 23 cycle. The 24 cycle starting to kind of take form, kind of starting to show some things, and spring practice is here. Right? For someone like myself, I can't sit still. So this is an amazing time. So I am so excited. We've picked out 3 colleges today, man. And I think we're going to stay in the SEC, my stomping grounds. We're going to talk about Bama, LSU, Florida, right? So the thing I have to ask right off the top, right? You're such a whiz when it comes to breaking down the film. You're such a savant when it comes to that. Bryce Young, right? As someone who lightly understands schematics, Bryce Young blows my mind and what he's able to do. I mean, you're told as a quarterback, here's how you should throw a football. And then you see how Bryce Young does it, and he can do 10 different motions, and the ball's getting where it needs to go every time. For you, right, what does Bryce Young do that separates him from other quarterbacks, in your opinion?
Well, I think you hit it on the head. He is so complete in every sense of the word. Like if you were to build a perfect quarterback, maybe you want like a little bit more size on Bryce Young from just a purely skill set. There is so much he does well. One of my favorite things about him is when he gets outside of the pocket, he's so polished to where he's able to keep his eyes downfield and be able to throw an accurate pass on the move. A lot of times a quarterback that's his age, like to be so young and to still have the presence of mind, okay, I'm going to keep my eyes downfield, get to my reads, get to my progression. And then 2, not just tuck it and run with how athletic he is, because I think both of those are temptations for guys that are that young, that athletic. I love his presence more than anything. So physical skill set, the fact he's able to be so mobile. I mean, even bigger picture, like I mentioned, his poise when he gets outside of the pocket to still distribute the football. I love that about him. He's very obviously a great athlete, but he wants to get the ball into better athletes' hands, which shows so much maturity from him. So I'm really excited. He could be a guy, and we'll go on record, I'm sure, in a much later video to talk about Heisman stuff, but he could be a guy where he's in a very real position to repeat as a Heisman Trophy winner, and that is saying something.
Yeah, and look, I'll go on record right now. I think Bryce Young, from the big picture, is the Heisman favorite right now. And if you're not taking Bryce Young, CJ Stroud is a name I'll accept, right? Mm-hmm. Caleb Williams will probably end up making some noise out in California. We're both very high on his upside, but Bryce is just so polished. And that's the thing I think that really stood out to me with 1 year starting was his ability to be so polished. What's your thoughts on Alabama's offensive line? They recruited it very well. They got 5-star guys that were freshmen last year, but what's your thoughts moving forward on the offensive line?
One thing I would say about Saban, and you probably know this better than anybody, he adjusts to his personnel very well. And so I think if there were to be the ace in the hole for Alabama, and not to call Nick Saban an ace in the hole, it probably gets more credit than that. If you're playing chess, he's probably your queen or your king or whatever you want to put to it, whatever metaphor. So I'm confident he'll be able to get that line in a place where they'll be more than serviceable. Now, will they be the strong point of the offense like you were mentioning? I mean, probably not. And that's not saying a ton given how much talent's going to be on this Alabama roster. One thing that I was impressed with, riffing on the offensive line piece, is how much Bryce Young was able to ad-lib, but also be controlled. There wasn't times where he was Johnny Manziel running around in the backyard, making throws off his back foot. Like everything he did felt calculated to where it's like, okay, if that play didn't go his way, Alabama's probably not in a disastrous spot. And so I think he bailed him out a lot last year with his legs. I think he'll do that again. But to answer your original question, I think Saban will have that offensive line in a spot where they're going to be not necessarily the strong point, but I don't think they'll lose games because of the offensive line.
So as someone who played college football, I talk about it, and you didn't play offensive line, but you were in a room where, you know this. How hard is that jump from the high school level to the college level at offensive line?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, in terms of the offensive line, I think the biggest thing is you have guys that are now in front of you that move 2 times faster than they did at the previous level, because as an offensive lineman, typically you're just the biggest guy in your team. You dominate 9 times out of 10, whoever's in front of you. The kids in front of you also don't have a ton in their bag, meaning they're probably just bull rushing you, not using a ton of different versatile moves, where when you get to, the college level, you have guys that are faster, more nuanced, better coached. And so that's why I think you see so many guys that play, as upperclassmen, and why you don't see a lot of freshmen playing, just because there's that jump from competition standpoint, but also it is a very real thing to be in a college weight room for 1 year. Like, you are substantially not, what's the best way to say this? It is a big jump to go from, hey, I'm going to do my high school program, even if it's a great high school program. Like, let's take Modern Day, for example. Very much a college-ready kind of program. They get kids ready to play. Even kids from Modern Day high school show up at the D1 FBS level and aren't strong enough, aren't eating enough, aren't eating what they need to be eating, probably aren't, able to be flexible enough. There's so many things that go into it to where it is a huge service to be able to be in a program for a while. And so same thing with Texas, right? They got like a ton of freshmen that are coming in as offensive linemen. They're going to be phenomenal. But you would ask anybody in Austin, and they say, if we got these freshmen playing next year, we probably have issues. So I think the learning curve is so steep because of that. It's different than being a running back and saying, hey, here are the holes. If you can wiggle and shake and be as fast as you were in high school, you'll probably have some reasonable success, and we'll coach you up as you get along. Whereas if you're an offensive lineman, the game's too fast for you. We got Bryce Young killed. That's on you, So it's stuff like that is not, the stakes are higher, and all that's to say, tough learning curve. But if anyone can do it, save it.
You brought up the running back position. There's a player for Alabama right now, man, who is generating a lot of noise. He's been winning awards in practices, right? Awards in the weight room, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs. Transferred from Georgia Tech, really versatile running back. What do you think Jahmyr Gibbs adds to Alabama?
I mean, it's just the rich getting richer, right? I mean, it adds to a stable that already has a guy like Trey Sanders, who's shown that he can tote the rock for you. Jahmyr Gibbs is a great downhill back. And so I think for what Saban likes to do and what they're going to be able to do with having Bryce Young on the zone read kind of game, he's going to be a guy that gets a lot of carries, obviously. But like I said, getting downhill, especially when your offensive line might be more dependent on a zone scheme as opposed to a man scheme. I don't know if that's going to be the case. That's going to allow for Jahmyr Gibbs to go to work and kind of hide, again, some of the things that you may not have on the offensive line. So to break that down a little bit more, a man scheme would be similar to like a power, where you have the guard pulling around. And he's the personal escort for that running back, meaning that guard had better know what he's doing and be able to be big enough and physical enough and fast enough to block somebody. Better have a good guard. Not saying Alabama doesn't have that, but saying that's very much a lot of weight on the offensive line to carry out that responsibility. Now, if you're doing a zone scheme, you just got to be displacing whoever it is in front of you. You don't have to pancake them. You don't have to drive them 10 yards back. It helps if you do those things, but if you get in the way and move him 6 inches off of his target, you give a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs, who's, again, a great downhill runner, getting there quick, fast, in a hurry, he can make a cut off your block, and you did your job, essentially. So to answer your question, I think Jahmyr Gibbs will bring a lot of decisive running. He'll bring a lot of physical downhill running and be a great complement to everything else they already have on that offense.
I think the thing that excites me the most about Jahmyr Gibbs is you talked about Bryce Young when the play breaks down and how poised he is. A back that graded as high as Jahmyr Gibbs in the receiving department. I said this in a video. I want you to imagine Bryce Young breaking from the pocket, looking downfield, and there's Jahmyr Gibbs, who is a running back who's very cognizant of what to do in those situations. That's a weapon. Now, I want to get your opinion on this, right? I've always said, if you don't have the greatest offensive line, or you're trying to break in a new offensive coordinator, great tight end play and great running back play can really make the world of difference for a quarterback. Is that something you agree with, or is there a lot more that goes into it?
I think that's 100% accurate. I think there's a good amount of scheme that goes into it as well.
Naturally.
I mean, I'm in Waco, Texas. And so the year before, during the COVID season, Baylor had, let's call it what it is, a very, very abysmal offensive line. They were one of the worst in the country. Bring in a new offensive coordinator, give them a full off season, and they went to just that, a zone scheme, to where they weren't asking the offensive line to manhandle who was in front of them. So now, to add to your point, they had a really good back and a really good tight end to be able to carry the mail for them once they got that 6 inches of displacement. So no, I think 100%. Anytime you can set the table even more so for that offensive line, you're going to make their job a lot easier. You don't have to block for 2-3 seconds for a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs. He needs a second and a half. He just needs some decisive daylight, and he can make something happen. So I think that's 100%, astute. Now, do you think Jahmyr Gibbs is going to be a guy that carries the mail for them as a go-to back? Will they ride the hot hand? What's your feeling how they'll utilize him? Because like I said, they have so many guys, right?
So the interesting thing about the room, man, and I talked about this last year, the room was decimated by injuries, but at one point last year, every running back they had was a former top 10 running back in the nation, former top 100 player in the nation. They just brought in another 5-star and Emmanuel Henderson, along with Jamarian Miller, both guys former top 10 running backs in the nation. Jamarian Miller, I think, comes in at number 67 overall in the nation on 24/7 Sports, number 7 running back, 6'1". I mean, big kid. Emmanuel Henderson, apparently he can play multiple different positions. There's been talk about, I mean, he has the athletic ability to do a lot. So I think it'll be more of a committee. I think that's what Saban would like to do, to keep legs fresh for the postseason, because I mean, that might sound pompous of me, but that's the expectation at Alabama is postseason, right? Like that is what it is. Yeah. That's the natural inclination. So I think they'll try and do that, but it's hard for me to believe that a player is receiving this much praise from even Nick Saban himself and is not going to be a major part of this offense. That's I think Jahmyr Gibbs is about to really do something special.
Without a doubt. And you have to think too, he had a lot going for him at Georgia Tech. So, I mean, obviously guy wanted to win some games, but I don't think Nick Saban goes and grabs Jahmyr Gibbs, to your point, if he's not going to be a guy that sees the ball a fair amount, right? Like if he's not going to be a guy that's toting the mail for you, you probably don't need to go and get a Jahmyr Gibbs.
Exactly. Now we could talk about the wide receivers, right? But I want to wait a little bit to have that conversation because all 3 of those guys are moving on. There's some veteran names that we're going to talk about a bit later, but there's just so many possibilities in the wide receiver room right now. We'd almost be going around in circles because we could reasonably name about 5 or 6 different names right now, right? Mm-hmm. So I kind of want to let things settle. I would like to move to the defensive side of the ball before we hit our other 2 programs.
Yeah.
When you're looking at Alabama's defense, we know Will Anderson's there. We know Dallas Turner's on the other side, and they accounted for, 26 sacks between the 2 of them, right? And one of them's a true freshman, the other's a sophomore. Is there an area on Alabama's defense, though, that you're really looking for improvement this year on?
I think the answer that most people would give you, and I imagine you have the same answer, as the secondary, right? Because against Georgia, and Georgia wasn't necessarily outstanding through the air. Like the strength of Georgia was going to be their run game all year long, but then they were able to kind of have some things go their way in the deep ball game against Bama. So for those guys to take the next step, I think is inevitable. And then you talk about what Nick Saban does, like those DBs are his babies. Like you have to imagine, I don't know if Saban takes anything personal, but if he did take something personal, it would be the way that those defensive backs played down the stretch and really most of last season. So I think the talent they have there with guy like Kool-Aid McKinstry taking his next year in the program, coming from a true freshman the year before, and now going to be a guy who I'd imagine they'll look upon a little bit more for some leadership, even though he's a sophomore. Just that whole defense being so young a year ago and probably playing before they really were ready to play, if that's even fair to say. I think they're going to be a force this coming year, dude. Like really the whole Saban offseason under their belt, they're going to be ready to roll, in my humble opinion.
Well, we talk about McKinstry, and I completely agree. That kid, I think, has so much ability. And cornerback is such a hard position to come in and play your freshman year. I mean, I don't envy anybody that does it. Any freshman that plays cornerback or nickel, I'm automatically looking at them like that's a dude. If you're out there as a freshman, that's someone to know. But they also brought in Eli Ricks from the transfer portal from LSU.
I forgot about that, yeah.
Right? And so now you're talking about Eli Ricks, who was the number 1 corner in his respective class, and Kool-Aid McKinstry, who was the number 1 corner in his respective class, both on the same field. That right there makes me very excited, and it gives me hope for the secondary. Right? I don't know that things will be fixed. I hope it will because Nick Saban, and because of that, I have faith, but it gives me a lot of hope. We'll move off of Alabama because we're going to revisit Alabama. Me being an Alabama fan, I'm going to pick your brain until you're sick and tired of talking about the Crimson Tide. But I want to talk about LSU now, right? Bryan Kelly comes in, and I think we both agree we're interested in what Bryan Kelly can do at LSU. Anytime you have somebody moving from Notre Dame that had the success they did there, what are you really looking forward to in terms of Bryan Kelly at LSU?
I think just because there's so much already under the hood at LSU from like a roster talent standpoint, they've got a solid quarterback in whether it's, Walker Howard, Jaden Daniels, Miles Brennan, they're going to have the right guy playing quarterback. So for the first time in really since the 2019 season, for them to have the right guys in place, that excites me because I really, I think Josh Pate said it really well when he was talking about Edward Geron leaving LSU. He's like, hey, whoever takes over this program, they're going to have some pieces at the table. It's not going to be a complete rebuild. So to have the right guy running the show, if they get that quarterback piece right, we did a live stream today on our channel and talked about like, hey, who are the dark horses for these different conferences, right? I was like, in the SEC, if you get the quarterback piece right at LSU, there's reason to believe they could mix it up and be in that race. Now, work's cut out for them in that conference. They probably need some things to break their way, but if you hit on the quarterback at LSU, I think they're going to be in contention to do some really good things.
Now, this might be putting you on the spot, right?
Who's
your favorite to win that quarterback battle?
That's a great question. I would probably side with Jaden Daniels only because anytime you jump out of the portal and go to a school as a quarterback, only one of those gets on the field, right? So there must have been some conversation between Bryan Kelly and Jaden Daniels' camp saying, hey, if you come here, I don't imagine he promised him anything, but I imagine it was a conversation of you will have a very legitimate chance to start. I don't anticipate Walker Howard will play as a freshman. Miles Brennan, I love his story. I like him as a person from what I understand. I don't think that he's the answer strictly because if he was the answer, he would have been so already. Like the guy hasn't been the overwhelming favorite for anybody in Baton Rouge the last however many years. Feels like he's played college football for the last decade. So I'll put my money on Jaden Daniels for that reason.
I have to agree, right? And look, I was a big fan of Jaden Daniels after his freshman year. That guy burst onto the scene, very talented player, has got a tremendous ceiling, but we never saw him hit that freshman year prowess that he had his next 2 years. Now, I contend that while he's not absolved of blame there, the chaos at Arizona State probably made it very hard for anybody to flourish in all of that. So I am very excited to see what Daniels does. Now, the one thing that concerns me about LSU, what do you think about their offensive and defensive line? A thing that we usually think of LSU and are like, okay, well, they're synonymous with trench warfare, right? Like this is what they do. We saw them get pushed around by UCLA last year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we talked, I guess we kind of had this conversation already when you talked about the Baylor example, but for LSU in particular, with these new quarterbacks with Bryan Kelly, that's got to be a major focal point this year. What are your expectations there?
Yeah, I think the pressure is more so on LSU in those arenas on the offensive and defensive side, obviously, because in the Big 12, you might get a week off against a Kansas or, maybe 1 year, let's just use Texas Tech. Maybe they don't have it that year on the defensive front. There's not going to be an off week for LSU. Like every single week they're going to the lion's den, no pun intended, and just having to get after it. So in terms of expectations for them, I think if they can at least just protect their quarterback, that'd be awesome and be comparable and find other ways to supplement what they don't have. So whether it's, hey, you got to keep a back end to help protect with a free blitzer. Maybe you have, 6 protection instead of 5. Maybe you add another linebacker to get to the quarterback. Finding ways to strengthen, where you're a little bit weaker. And I have full confidence Bryan Kelly will be able to do that. I think he has a good staff in place to be able to do that effectively. So all that's to say, they're going to have to get creative, I think, and they're going to have to get creative and make it work in a hurry. It might be with bubble gum and tongue depressors for this first year, but I think they'll get it done and be able to build forward because he's going to recruit well. I mean, you and I both know he's going to recruit the guys and get them in boat. But yeah, for this first year, might have to get a little bit creative.
Well, especially because Louisiana, you have no real competition there in terms of who do you need to worry about taking the talent from you. It's LSU there, right? Other schools are trying to get into that state. If you're in Alabama, you have to recruit against Auburn. If you're in Texas, you have to recruit against everybody, right? Like it's just LSU, which is why I'm so interested there. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, LSU has been synonymous with DBU, but you know better than anybody. A big part of that is now in Waco. Another big part of LSU being DBU is in Florida, in Corey Raymond. So defensively for LSU, where are they going to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. The honest answer is I don't know. I think that LSU in itself as a brand has that reputation and I think will attract some recruits. But at the end of the day, brand gets you there maybe, but these coaches are the ones that's going to put it on the field. So I hate to give you an uneducated answer and say, man, I really don't know. I think they're going to have to, like I said, get creative under Bryan Kelly. And it's not so much a doubt of within the next 2 years. I think Bryan Kelly will recruit well, get the right guys there and all that. But in year one, I think that's got to be one of the biggest question marks because they went in the portal, did a great job at quarterback, in my opinion. They've got some playmakers on the outside in Keishon Butte, but on defense, man, it's like that could be what sinks the ship. They've got some strong players, but I don't know if they have enough as a unit to be in really good shape.
Yeah, they got some guys out the portal, and I think you and I agree where it's LSU. They're known for defensive football. The fan base demands a certain expectation of the defensive side of the football, so I don't think they're going to be bad. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what they're going to look like, and that is going to be incredibly telling. And finally, we talk about Corey Raymond, man. I just did a video the other day talking about five-star DB Tony Mitchell, and as I said in the video, Bama fans rejoice when Corey Raymond leaves LSU for Florida, but now you're recruiting against him again because he's still a thorn in your side in the SEC. Mm-hmm. You did a video not long ago talking about the defensive coordinator for the University of Florida and why you were so excited about him. I'd like for you to first walk me through that, walk the listeners through what stands out in that aspect for Florida. But then I want you to talk to me about Corey Raymond because we know what he does on the recruiting trail.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of a defensive scheme at Florida, what they did at what they did at Louisiana a year ago was find ways to create confusing looks for the offense. So to walk you more through that, they would use what's called a creeper, right? So a creeper is essentially a blitzer coming from somewhere other than that third, or fourth defensive lineman. So they play with three defensive linemen, which means somebody else is more than likely coming, but they're going to dress it up and he's going to come from somewhere you're not expecting. And it can be in this defense, literally anyone, but what would be like the farthest away corner. They call them a field corner. And so what they do is they blitz somebody, but they have somebody else behind him to essentially account for where he was. Because a lot of times in a defensive structure, if you blitz, you leave yourself exposed behind you because, hey, I brought that linebacker. Well, that leaves a big hole behind it where they're going to blitz and drop somebody else right into that coverage. And so all that's to say, they do a lot of things well in terms of creating pressure and confusing looks. So that's what I'm excited about for them because I think at Florida, that's an aggressive nature that we haven't really seen. And you talk about Florida, they should be able to recruit fast guys day and night. So again, is it this year? I don't know, but the scheme is going to, one, be exciting for guys to come and for Corey Raymond to recruit to. And then secondly, it's going to be, I think, an exciting brand of football to watch, something they haven't had in the swamp there since, Dan Mullen was there, which is what it is.
I knew he was done whenever he went up to the podium and said, we worry about recruiting in the offseason. And I was like, you cannot say that as the head coach of Florida in the SEC. You can't do that. Now, here's what I want to hear from you, man, because you were talking to me last time about your excitement for the new coaching staff at Florida, your excitement for Billy Napier. And we were talking about the talent density in Florida. And I was able to try and find some of those numbers, right? Some of the numbers, man, there's like 50 kids in the top 300 from the state of Florida. There's like 7 or 8 5-stars from the state of Florida. So you're talking about a disproportionate amount of talent in this state. What are your expectations for Billy Napier year one? What do you like about him? And finally, can he lock down the state of Florida?
All $1 million questions, right? I love that Billy Napier is investing into this program, right? Got a ton of support staff. They got revamped nutrition, revamped housing. There's a lot of things they're doing to invest into Florida and make Florida football important again to the administration, because it really wasn't if you look at what they did under Dan Mullen. So that excites me that they're like, hey, Florida football is important. Secondly, I think they're going to be able to knock down the state of Florida for sure because of how much they're investing into that and the way they're building the staff to be great recruiters. That's going to be a game changer, man. It's going to be either them or Miami. Like the beautiful part about the structure of Florida right now is all those teams in Florida are now having to get serious about recruiting because all their neighbors are getting serious about recruiting. So, I mean, the higher tide is essentially raising all ships. And I love it so much. To sum it up, Billy Napier's saying, hey, man, scary money don't make no money. And they're investing in it now. And I think that's something that's been missing at Florida for a long, long time. And so for it to finally be here, I mean, they're playing the game the right way now in the SEC, because A&M's done it. Bama's been doing it. Georgia is now on the latter half of having done it for several years. So I think he can lock down a portion of the state of Florida. I think Miami's going to give them run for their money, though, too.
Yeah, I think both of us agree there, especially with what Miami's got going. And it's funny you say about the state of Florida. There was a block in Florida. I don't know if you've heard this before, but on this block was Lamar Jackson, Calvin Ridley, Riley Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, and Amari Cooper. All grew up within like so far of each other. And if I'm not mistaken, I said that to someone and they were like, oh, well, don't forget Hollywood Brown. Hollywood Brown was from right around there as well. So, I mean, you've got so much talent in the state of Florida that it's going to be key that they are able to keep some of it home. I think the last thing I'll hear from you, man, when it pertains to Florida is offensively. What direction are they going to go now that they've moved off of Dan Mullen, who is lauded as an offensive guy?
Yeah, I think the best thing that they're going to do at Florida this coming year is they'll have an identity. And what I mean by that is they're going to run the football, and they're going to be, what's the right word? They're going to be complex, but not overly complex in their passing strategy. So they're going to do a lot of things before the snap with motions and window dressing, just to make it simpler for their quarterback. Like, they're going to get a simple picture for their quarterback by making the defense tip their hand routinely. If you go back and watch Louisiana, they're having a motion or two motions nearly every single play. And that's to get the defense to essentially show what kind of coverage they're in or what blitz they're bringing or whatever it may be. And so for a guy like Anthony Richardson, to where the knock on him has been, hey, maybe not an elite passer yet, he's going to have a lot more simple pictures. And then also he's going to be able to have the zone read game where he's going to be able to do what he does and just be special in the open field. So the exciting thing for me is they're going to make football simple, and they're going to give a quarterback, whether it's Anthony Richardson, whether it's Jack Miller, they're going to give them a really simplistic picture to work with and just let good athletes be good athletes. And we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, be super pro style with a million different audibles. It's going to be, let's line up, let's make sure we know what we're looking at, and let's play ball. So they're going to have identity, which excites me. But what are your thoughts on that?
I agree completely. And I was about to ask you who you think wins the quarterback competition. And it's crazy you said Anthony Richardson. A year ago, almost to the day, I did in a video, and I said, I think Anthony Richardson is going to make this more of a competition than people realize. Come to find out, it was much more of a competition than people realize, because Anthony Richardson's ceiling is as high as it is. But JD, I'm not going to keep you any longer, because I want to be able to continue making content with you. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that if I don't get you back to the wife, and if I don't get back to the girlfriend, because I might get us both in a whole lot of trouble. But man, where can everybody find you at? That way they can get connected with you.
Well, I appreciate that one. And I hope that, you're safe after we finish up recording here. But can find me on Twitter at JD Piquel, YouTube channel CFB with JD. And man, I'm excited to keep making content with you and keep this ball rolling. Obviously a big fan of yours, and excited to be a part of your process, brother.
Yeah, man, I'm super excited for it. Guys, to keep you kind of in the know, JD and I have been talking. We're thinking right now we're going to try and make weekly content together. Whether that works in the off season, we're going to iron it out. But right now we want to do one video a week, maybe even ramp it up. But because we're having a lot of fun doing this. And so that's why I say I don't want to get him in trouble and ruin my chances of this episode 2 in. But guys, if you enjoyed this, hop down to the comments. Tell us the teams or the topics you want to see next week so that we kind of have an inclination as what to talk about there. Comment it on JD's channel. Comment it on mine. Say, hey, I'd like for you and JD to talk about this, and we'll get it talked about. But thank you so much for y'all being here this evening. And with that, we'll see you next time.